Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. And this week, we're going to jump right into it. No exposition, nothing. We're jumping right in. Why are we jumping right in? I'll tell you why. Because this week's episode is all about one of my favorite franchises, and I'm sure it is at least a handful of you would say it's one of your favorite franchises as well. Now, the latest installment of this particular franchise is coming out in just a couple of weeks. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty stoked. So I am talking about Mad Max. So Mad Max coming out on May 24th, 2024. Of course, directed by George Miller. You have the Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth-led Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. Now, I have to tell you, and we're going to go through the whole franchise here. I definitely have I don't know how to put this. Let's put it this way. There are some Gen X-based franchises, things that have come out in our formative years, that have had later installments. And some of those later installments have been critically panned, maybe viewer panned, kind of a mixed bag, if you will. Now, I will tell you, I'm one of the people, when we talk about Star Wars, that loved the original George Lucas, but I also loved the prequels by George Lucas. I actually really enjoyed The Force Awakens, was super stoked about this new entry, this new era. That great cliffhanger that you got with Luke Skywalker on the island of Ahch-To, the planet Ahch-To, where Rey goes to find him. Awesome. And I liked three quarters of The Last Jedi. Right? Only thing I didn't like was how Luke went out. That whole thing didn't work for me. But I loved grumpy, curmudgeonly Luke. It was great. So I don't necessarily automatically dismiss later entries in a particular franchise. Now, oftentimes it can be looked at as just a cash grab by the studio or the filmmakers themselves. I don't think someone like Steven Spielberg ever likes to put out a product that he doesn't feel strongly about, because as much as he's this big, huge director, he's also, at least to me, I guess at least projected an air of integrity as a filmmaker. He's made some pretty heavy stuff. And I think that he's a craftsman in that regard, right? And I've heard a lot of people say that these later entries of Indiana Jones, for example, lackluster, if you will. I really enjoyed things like the Jurassic Park, not reboot, extension, I guess you would say, with Chris Pratt and Bryce Howard. I really enjoyed them. Jeff Goldblum coming back. So I'm actually a big fan of, I guess, franchises continuing and opening up to new audiences while still being true, when they are, of course, kept true to the original intent or ethos, if you will, of those franchises. So you notice that when I said Star Wars, I didn't really say anything about Rise of Skywalker. Had some great moments because it's a Star Wars movie, but moments was about it. My family is somewhat divided on the TV shows, in part because my oldest boy, who is deeply versed in things like Clone Wars and Rebels and all that, far more than I am. One of his friends said the last few installments of, I guess, the third season of Mandalorian and the first season of Ahsoka weren't very good. So he's just like, I don't want to watch it and ruin it for myself. I'm just like, come on, let's go for it. Let's just watch it. Right? So here we are. We're not talking about any of those franchises, but we are talking about Mad Max. Now, I will tell you that in at least my memory, I did see installment 2 first and then went back and saw the first one. So the original Mad Max, the basis for all of this, you had a first-time filmmaker in George Miller who had conceived this idea and went and sought out various different people to help him because he didn't really know anything about it. So he had the original story that he worked with someone by the name of Byron Kennedy, and then went and sought out screenplay writers. And James McCausland had never actually written a script before, but that's just a little behind the scenes stuff there, okay? And Byron Kennedy would end up being George Miller's production partner. Good friends, business partners, creative minds. So Mad Max came out April 12th, 1979. And I just want to say that when I said at the start, we're just jumping right in. That's what George Miller does. He jumps right in. Now, mind you, at the start of one of the movies or a couple of the movies, there's a little bit of early, I guess, some exposition to try to set up what is this world that we're in. But the first Mad Max doesn't start out that way. It starts right out of the gate with Charlie and Roop, who are a couple of the, they're not special forces. They are considered the Main Force Patrol, the MFP. And this is a dystopian setting. But what I think is so interesting about the first Mad Max, where it is paced differently than other installments, is the fact that civilization had not yet completely crumbled. And it's about to. The civility, the civil order is on the brink of collapse. This police department is underfunded. The police station looks like it's been hit by God knows what. It is beat up, it's decrepit, and you have broken file cabinets and tables and brick where walls have clearly been damaged. It looks as though it's on the brink of total collapse, both literally and figuratively. And really a lot of the basis of this is now these gangs have started to rise up. So what has caused this dystopian future? You have a combination of a couple of things. So you have oil shortages, for example. But you also have what's continued to be called ecocide. So ecocide, by definition, it comes from the Greek oikos, home, and Latin cadere, to kill. Ecocide is the destruction of the environment by humans. Ecocide threatens all human populations who are dependent upon natural resources for maintaining ecosystems and ensuring their ability to support future generations. Now, this is not necessarily completely analogous to things like climate change, etc. They're certainly related. And this in particular is saying a shortage of fossil fuels. So in large parts of the world in this history, fossil fuels are hard to come by, which makes them a even more precious commodity, to the point where people, in order to survive, are vying for this precious resource. But when you think about the world and what we live in a modern era, farms, large commercial farms, or even small family farms are largely dependent upon machines to do the work. Now, that's not to say that we couldn't completely revert to a bygone past and do this with horses, for example, pushing your plows instead of having these huge tractors and these huge pieces of equipment. Certainly we can get there. But for the era that we're talking about, this near future of Mad Max, they're still holding on to the comforts of the world in which we've grown accustomed, and completely haven't reverted back to, okay, we can actually do all of this without machinery. We have the means and capacity. We've just simply forgotten, or we're just too lazy to do it the old-fashioned way. Now, in a competitive landscape, obviously, if you want to keep up, you can't do it that way. You have to have these larger means of production. But in this future, as we will find out in later installments, there is a capacity to get back to some basics and technologies that can be driven by renewable resources. For example, wind power, etc. All of these things come into play in later installments. But at this point, people are fighting over these resources. And civilization as we know it is collapsing. So these biker gangs are out, and part of it is they can, right? But they have these cool hopped up vehicles, motorcycles, and muscle cars. So they're just going to take whatever fuel they want or they can find. Anything be damned. Oh, you've got a car? We're going to run you off the road. We're going to beat you, assault you, maybe we'll kill you, and we're going to take your vehicle. We're going to take your fuel. Like, that's the kind of mindset that we're dealing with, and just in general causing chaos. So this particular gang, I don't think they have an actual name. However, they have members with really cool names like Knight Rider and Toecutter and Bubba. What's Bubba's last name? Bubba Zanetti. What a great name. This is Australia, right? What a cool name. Bubba Zanetti. You have Johnny the Boy. You have, who else do we have? Grease Rat. Oh, that's just a mechanic near the beach. But what great names. And they're running roughshod everywhere. And basically this opening scene is Knight Rider is just causing havoc. So Charlie and Roop, who are a couple of officers of the MFP, they go after him, and he actually outsmarts them. They have him dead to rights. You get a little comic relief with Charlie and Roop. He has him dead to rights, and he slams on his brakes. They over-pursue, whole thing, and now they're kind of broken down, have to get back started. Not to go through the whole thing, but anyway, Max is the one who intercedes at this point. He's the best driver of the group. He's the top pursuit man. He's the guy, Max Rockatansky, played by, of course, Mel Gibson. And he tracks him down, ultimately resulting in Knight Rider getting killed in a crash. You know what that means. We now have a conflict between the bikers and the MFP. So Max is then shown this really cool car, a specially built V8-powered supercharged black pursuit special, which is a Ford Falcon GT. The Ford Falcon was not here in the States. This was made by Ford Australia. So bear in mind, these multinational automobile makers do have specific models for particular countries. Sometimes there's spec that's based upon fuel economy and emissions and all those kind of things. So anyway, the Ford Falcon GT. And this is meant to be a bribe, if you will, because Max is considering retirement, right? It's like, I don't want to do this anymore because Max has a wife and a kid. We'll get to that in just a minute. So, there's a riot in town led by Toecutter and Bubba Zanetti. Now, part of this is because of what's happened to Knight Rider. They are mourning and they're mad. Yes, biker gang. They're going to be grieving one of their own, one of their fallen. Emotional response. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that there's a certain level of psychopathy within the group. They start terrorizing people. They destroy this young couple's car, assaults them, and then Max and Goose before Goose from Top Gun, by the way. Goose is always going to be your top guy. Think about that. Just think about that for a minute. They arrest Toecutter's protege, if you will, Johnny the Boy. So because no witnesses appear in court, for any side, by the way, prosecution, defense, nobody shows up. Nobody in the town shows up. Nobody. Which means no witnesses. You already have a challenge to what exactly happened. And then Johnny is deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. So it gets thrown out. Here's your conflict. Goose, pissed, fight, beats him up. This is now a problem. So to cut ahead to some things, Goose then becomes a target of the gang because he is really blatantly out there saying, I'm going to get you guys. And kind of the law be damned. Now, the captain of the MFP, greatest nickname, big burly guy, huge, right? Fifi. Love it. And he wears this like scarf tied around his neck. It's absolutely freaking brilliant. Anyway, Fifi's like, whatever you do on the road, just do it by the book. He was like, just do the paperwork. Just do it right, kind of thing. Now, obviously, the rules have been somewhat relaxed to what we would consider to be a civilization. Nevertheless, there is basically an ambush. So they ambush Goose, who then has to go ahead and get a ute, which is basically, I don't know, it looks like a Subaru Brat kind of thing. It's like a small little truck kind of thing to take his motorcycle back because it's been sabotaged. But on the way back with his bike, Johnny goes ahead, attacks him, and he ends up flipping his vehicle. He's stuck upside down, and Toecutter basically forces Johnny to light a match, which then puts up all the fuel that was leaking out of the vehicle, essentially burning Goose to a crisp. Johnny, by the way, did not want to do this. So now Max says, I'm done. So this is a critical moment of the character that we know as Mad Max, okay? Because he typically likes to get away from conflict, right? He has survival instincts. It's like, I don't want to end up dead. I don't want to do this anymore. My best friend, my partner, is burned in the ICU. He's probably not going to make it. We're not funded. We don't have any help. Like, everything's going to shit. I think it's most important for me to go to be with my family, which is, of course, his wife, Jessie, and their son, Sprague. And Sprague is apparently Australian slang for child. So, hey, Jessie and the Sprague, we're going to go, and we're just going to get away from it all. And they go and they stay with a family friend by the name of May. Except the gang finds them. Now, this is the scene. So here we have spoilers. All these years later, spoilers. This is the scene that I remember going, wow, this is pretty dark. Now, I think that Mad Max is the darkest of them all, the one that sets it all off. Because, and I just remember this scene so strongly as a kid, of Jessie and Sprague running down the middle of this long Australian road, you know, just miles and miles of nothingness, and the gang running them down effectively. And you see Sprague's little shoe roll into the street. So now Max's son is dead. His wife is in critical condition and most likely is going to succumb to her injuries. Now Max is mad, and he goes and he steals the pursuit special, and he goes after them all. And one by one, he goes after Toecutter. He goes after Bubba. Toecutter ends up in a blaze, and there's a scene of, it's hard to describe, but like this flash of, so when the bad guys die in this movie, the two main ones, right? Your Knight Rider and your Toecutter, there's like this cutaway scene that's like their eyes bulge out. It's this crazy thing, which is interesting because it is a similar recurring motif with Miller of these startling just close-ups of something horrific. And we'll get more to that. Nevertheless, Bubba does shoot Max right in the leg, right in the knee. Now, that's critical to keep that in mind, all starting in this very first movie. So, Max, boom, Toecutter dead, Bubba's dead, and that leaves Johnny, who has run away from the scene, and he finds a overturned vehicle, and there's a guy who's dead who got thrown from the vehicle. Johnny is like rummaging around. He's going to steal his boots. And this is the ending of the movie. This is when you know that Max is no longer part of civilization. He handcuffs Johnny to this truck, which is just bleeding gas, right? So it's dripping gasoline, petrol, whatever you want to call it. And he makes a wick, a very long wick, a fuse, if you will. And he tells Johnny, hey, here's the deal. He handcuffs him, hands him a hacksaw, and says, here's my advice. It will take you 10 minutes to cut through the handcuffs. Take you 5 minutes to cut through your ankle. You decide. And takes off. Of course, as Max drives away, boom. I guess we don't know if he really had 10 minutes to spare or not, but the supposition is Johnny go boom, and Max goes and rides out into the wasteland. I know I just did a whole recap of Mad Max. I'm sorry, but it's just so good. All of it is just so good. And it's dark and it's bleak. And the whole thing is, George Miller talked about wanting to create a silent movie with sound. And like, well, what does that mean? How does that make sense? Very little dialogue, particularly from your lead character. And that it's the action that's speaking for, that's what's conveying the story. And if you think about it, that's what Charlie Chaplin, for example, had to do. It was all about movement and creating facial expressions and movements that were expressing something. Well, that's what George Miller did with vehicles. And Max didn't need to say much. And it still conveyed all of the emotions and the feelings, and you knew what was going through his mind when now he's enraged and I'm going to get all those sons of bitches. So, goes off in the wasteland. Civilization crumbles. He's a man without a family, without a job, but he's got this sweet car. So now, you fast forward, and we're looking at what was known in the United States as the Road Warrior. Now, this starts out kind of explaining more about what exactly happened. So, global war resulted in widespread oil shortages, ecocide, civilization collapse, and a world descended into barbarism. Now, former policeman Max Rockatansky, haunted by the deaths of his family, drives his supercharged black V8 pursuit special around the desert wilderness of Australia, scavenging for food and petrol with his Australian cattle dog. Dogs are great. Such cool companions. And I even think about some of the other stuff that's come out recently. I mentioned, Fallout, also a dystopian future. And instead of a man and his dog, it's a ghoul and his dog. What are you going to do? Anyway, again, it starts out right away. So yeah, we get the kind of, hey, what happened? How did we get here? Right into Max scavenging for food. He's scavenging for gasoline. And he comes into conflict with some marauders. Some gang-type people, one of them being Wex, who is a biker, who is joined by, the golden... Oh my gosh, what is his name? Where does it go? How come it's not here? It's the golden... Oh, I had all this laid out too. Let's see. Where did it go? Oh my gosh. Why can't I find it? All it says is Wex's partner, but he actually has a name. And they mourn him. I know, I'm jumping way ahead here. Let's see. The Golden Youth. I could not think of it. I had to find it. So anyway, there's Wex, and he's wearing this wild outfit, and he's got this kind of like face paint on, and he's unhinged, and he has this Golden Youth behind him, basically in bondage gear, and a collar with a chain attached to Wex, of course, and a couple of other vehicles. And they see Max and like, oh, well, you want the same thing that we do. We want petrol. We want food. And they go after him. So it turns into a big, huge fight. Just so happens that Max is a very, very good driver. And it turns into a whole thing. He gets the other guy to shoot Wex by mistake with an arrow, and then he basically outmaneuvers the other guys. Wex is still alive, yanks the thing out of his arm, puts it back in his quiver, and screams enraged at Max. So now our entire conflict is set. So here's one of the things to think about. It's continuity when you're going to do a franchise. And Max wears this crude knee brace from when he was shot in the first Mad Max. He's also wearing his leathers from when he was a police officer. Now, mind you, they've seen better days, and he has like armored panel added to it, but you're seeing the same guy, the same vehicle, the same clothes, the same injury now years later into this. It's not even, there's not a vendetta. There's no one left to get, right? From the bad guys, that gang is gone. The people who killed his family is gone. All he is doing is surviving. Nothing more, nothing less. This is when we first meet Jedediah. Is it Jedediah in this one? No, this is the gyro captain. He has like this weird little flying vehicle. By the way, the same actor does play Jedediah, but we'll get to that. Let's see. They fight. The dude is like, okay, I'll help you. I will take you wherever you want to go. Just so happens that there's a working oil refinery. Now, imagine you're in this future where resources are so precious and you find that there's a working oil refinery. This is going to be a target for anyone who's out in this wasteland. So all the people who are there in this facility are at risk. So let's see. Max goes there. Just so happens that there's this huge siege happening. A gang of marauders. And who is part of this group? You guessed it, Wex from earlier. So now you also have, here's a thread that's connecting the earlier opening scene and what the conflict is now. He does rescue someone by the name of Nathan, survivor of one of the cars that had been accosted, brings him back and meets, well, he dies anyway, but meets Pappagallo, who is the leader. The leader. Let's see, he strikes a deal to return him to the complex in exchange for fuel, but the man dies. So because Nathan had died, Pappagallo said, you might have had a deal with him to give you fuel, died with him. They confiscate. They're going to try to confiscate Max's car. They're going to throw him out to the marauders. And that's when the feral child arrives and throws this cool boomerang thing. And I don't know if when you were young and you saw that thing, you're like, that kid's a badass. It's like basically a scythe, and he just, and this ends up killing the Golden Youth. Now Wex is grieving, like mourning, which gives way to rage, right? But the leader of the gang is not Wex. No. That is Lord Humongous. And as you all probably know, Lord Humongous is he's a humongous man who wears a hockey mask, by the way, before Jason Voorhees. But he's also dressed vaguely like He-Man, basically bondage gear, and he is the Ayatollah of rock and rolla. He is, as much as he's this massive hulking mass, obviously a dangerous man, he's also intelligent. And he has said, look, I'm going to spare everybody. You just got to give me your fuel, right? And you got one day. And if you don't do it, we're going to get y'all. So now the settlers in this refinery, they have this mixed feelings about, can we trust him? Can we not? Probably not. But Max offers his own deal. He says, hey, I can get this semi-truck that I saw on the road, and we can haul away all your oil. Hey, you let me do it, and then you just give me as much fuel as I can. And they agree. Okay, fine. So Max goes off, does that. He encounters the gyro captain again, says, hey, fly me back to this truck. And he drives back. And now he has introduced the gyro captain to this whole community. So win-win. So then they all decide that, hey, we have to get out of here. And this is where it becomes, dude, they kill his dog, right? Humongous tracks down Max. Anyway, fast forward. Max has this truck, and it is filled with fuel. It's filled with gasoline or filled with oil. And he's setting out, and he's going to battle the marauders, and they just have to get to where they're going. They just have to stop them. And this is where you see the true vision of where George Miller was going with all this, right? It was setting up these amazing road, not even pursuits. They're not, they're chases, but there's something else altogether. Just very, very cool. And a lot of great stunt work. And you see little glimmers of what would come. And that's what I think is so cool about all of this. So anyway, bunch of them die. It doesn't go particularly well. Humongous collides with Max's truck that Wes is also on. So they're all dead. Truck rolls off the road, and it turns out the whole time it was filled with sand. It was a decoy. And the gyro captain and Max think this is absolutely hilarious and completely understandable. They rendezvous with the settlers who transported the fuel in other vehicles. Gyro Captain becomes the new leader, and he's going to take them on their way. And Max goes out into the wilderness. And our voiceover is done by the feral kid who's now all grown up. But once again, Max just goes off, just disappears, and they never see him again. Recurring theme. That's another thing I love about the franchise. It's always a matter of keeping the character true to Max. And what's great is if you do the character right, you write it with that integrity and that intentionality of this is the character of Max Rockatansky, you can conceivably even change actors and have it still be successful. So that brings us to the next one, which may or may not be your cup of tea, but we're talking about July 10th, 1985. I saw this in the movie theater. I was 11 years old, and that is what was very difficult, by the way, for George Miller to do this because Byron Kennedy had actually died, and that was his partner, and he kind of thought that he wasn't going to do it. Can't do it. Like, not going to do it, and screw it, I'm done. And people convinced him, like, no, man, you got to do it. Even more so. You've been working on this. And, you know, let's bring this character forward. So Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, once again, kind of starts off with, hey, this is what happened. And now Max is a little worse for wear. He's got long hair, and he's got his pursuit special now basically just a covered wagon, if you will. Again, well, I guess, was it even his? Maybe it wasn't even. Maybe it wasn't the pursuit special, because that, in theory, got destroyed in the last movie, didn't it? I think so. Anyway, I got to go back and watch all the vehicles, because that's something that's talked about as well. There's a lot of continuity, but then like the vehicle, like is the most recent version of Max still the same one, different timeline? What are we looking at here? But anyway, I mentioned that there was Jedediah. Well, the gyro captain is the same actor. I'll pull it up in just a second. That is Bruce Spence. Except this time, he is with his son, Jedediah Jr., and they basically attack Max from the air and steal his vehicle. So Max is in quick pursuit, following him as best he can on foot until he comes to a place called Bartertown. Initially refused entry because he has nothing to trade, he impresses the locals with his toughness, and the founder and ruler of the town Aunty Entity, played by none other than the legendary Tina Turner, offers to resupply him if he completes a task. Now, what's great is that there's these little moments of humor, right? So in order to enter into Bartertown, he has to take out his weapons, and it's just like weapon after weapon after weapon. It's like these little moments that are true to the character, but provide a little bit of levity at these different moments. But Aunty Entity explains that Bartertown energy is actually coming from a subterranean refinery called Underworld that basically is turning pig feces into methane. So remember, I said they'd have to find ways to survive in this new future with different methods for energy. And that's exactly what they've done. So the refinery is run by a dwarf by the name of Master, who of course rides on the back of Blaster, his giant bodyguard. Master Blaster, they're called together because you can't have Master without Blaster and Blaster without Master. And this is a threat to Aunty Entity's control of Bartertown because basically they're controlling all the energy and can open up the spigot more or less should they want to go ahead, and they could cause a brownout, for example, or a blackout, for example, and just turn off the supply of gas. So this is an issue. So she wants Max to kill Blaster, and then, hey, man, Master will do what I want if you get rid of Blaster. You know what I mean? Raggedy man. Love Tina Turner. So Max goes down there, sees Master Blaster, and becomes friends with a guy by the name of Pig Killer. And why is he called Pig Killer? Because he's a convict. He was sentenced to Underworld because he slaughtered one of the pigs to feed his children. Now, those pigs are not meant for eating. They're made for shitting so that they can go ahead and make methane. So, yeah, he wanted to feed his family, but that's a precious commodity, right? So Master Blaster learns that there's this newly acquired vehicle, which is Max's. Okay, so yes, Max's vehicle is still there. He forces him to disarm a booby trap. Oh, by the way, the booby trap does come into play in this one or another one. It might have been in the last one. Max's vehicle, heavily booby trapped. Like, you can't do stuff to it without him allowing it. So anyway, but it causes this alarm to go off that Max has rigged. And this is when he discovers that Blaster is very sensitive to high-pitched noises, right? So now Max has intel, right? And he goes back, and Auntie says, all right, so here's the deal. We need you to go ahead and start some shit with Master Blaster. And then what we'll do is we're going to have you go into the gladiatorial arena. Thunderdome. Max is like, fine. Okay. So, I mean, there's like chainsaws and swords and spears, all kinds of crazy weapons. But the whole credo of this is 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. That's cool. That's so cool. Oh, you know what? Very quickly, I got to write this down because I need to get back to it. Because there's something that is a callback. Okay, so 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. They get into a fight. Max knocks off the helmet of Blaster to discover, and they say intellectual disabilities. If I recall correctly, and I watched the clip earlier, I believe that Blaster has Down syndrome. Just also happens to be like 6'5" and a mass of humanity. And Max can't do that. He can't do it, right? Because he's Max. And yes, he's done some dodgy shit to bad guys, but he's not going to do it to this, like, you know, this kid. He's a child with major intellectual problems. And he's just going to go ahead and the Blaster smiles at him, you know, like Max was done at that point. He was a father. He's very paternal in a lot of ways. That also comes into play. Nevertheless, what does Auntie do? She killed Blaster anyway. and now she's in control of Master. So Max is punished. He's bound, placed on a horse, backwards, by the way, thing over his head, send him out into the wasteland, and that's it. Horse collapses in the desert, dies. Max frees himself, continues, and ends up finding basically the Lost Boys. Yes, the Lost Boys from Peter Pan. There's a girl called Savannah Nix, finds Max, brings him back to their oasis called Planet Earth. Planet Earth. That's right, it's a play on Planet Earth, because that's all they know, because they were all little kids when a Boeing 747 had crashed, and the adults, some of whom left, never returned, most likely perished, and they believe that Max is the second coming of Captain Walker, the pilot of the plane who's there to fix it, and is going to fly them away to Tomorrowland. Max is like, it's not me. But at the same time, he's like, these are a group of kids. But some of them decide that they are going to go to Journey to Bartertown because they think that is like this new cool place that they can go. Max tries to stop them, and they don't, and they tie him up, and they go off and do their thing. So now Max needs to go ahead and save them. Well, now they get together as a group. They go into Underworld. Pig Killer helps. They free Master. They escape in this truck, and they go down some train tracks because it's a truck train. The fact that you have like the cowcatcher in the front is also a recurring motif. And they're now in a battle. And now like Auntie's bad guys and her whole army, they're going after them because basically they've taken a critical component of their society, which is Master running this refinery. And you've taken some workers, and I believe they've taken some fuel as well. One of the kids has stolen his vehicle back for him, which is great. And they're going to fly away because Jedediah and his son decide that they're going to join forces once again. But if you remember Jedediah Jr., Dad, what Dad mate? So good. Again, this comic relief in the midst of all this. But yeah, Max does it all. Fights everybody off. Helps everyone go on their way. The bad guys are defeated. And Aunty Entity is impressed by all that Max has done. So the scene on the train truck and this particular group of baddies, so Aunty Entity's crew, there are so many scenes and cuts and even costuming, some of the stunts that are so reminiscent of what would come. And I sometimes forget, because I think that Thunderdome gets a little bit of it gets short shrift. And when you look at even the Rotten Tomatoes reviews and all that, it was the least favorably reviewed of all of them. Even then, it's still like in the high 80s, something like that. But nevertheless, all the kids and Jedediah, they fly away and they go to the ruins of Sydney, Australia, where they're able to figure out how to have like electricity. And Savannah recites the story of their journey and Captain Walker and all of that. And meanwhile, Max, once again, has saved the day, have helped this group of strangers, all these people, goes off on his own, back into the wasteland. God, it's so good. It's so good. So now, we wait. Let's see. 30 years? No. Did I do that wrong? Hold on a second. Yeah, I had to just stop and go, really? 30? I questioned myself. It can't be. 30 years in between. So Mad Max Thunderdome, Beyond Thunderdome, July 10th, 1985. Mad Max Fury Road, May 15th, 2015. This is now where I talked about how future entries and if you keep it real. So I hadn't seen it, and I'm visiting family. So family vacation that we would do at this lake in Wisconsin. And my brother-in-law, Daniel, who's been on the show, he goes, "Have you seen the new Mad Max movie?" I'm like, "No, I haven't. I want to, but, it's not Mel Gibson." He goes, "Dude." So we're on this vacation. So the three brother-in-laws, when I say brother-in-laws, I mean my wife and her sisters. They have one younger brother. So it's her younger brother and the three sons-in-laws. The other son-in-law was, I think, in Chicago at the time. We're like, we're going to go see this movie. We're going. So the four of us, an hour away, we're on this beautiful lake. Turns out the weather was kind of crappy that day. And we drive to this small theater somewhere in Wisconsin. And it might have been actually in Illinois. Might have been right on the border. And we go, and I am stunned. It just hits you in the face right away. And I can't remember, other than seeing the Star Wars movies come back, right? So probably, I can tell you, it's Force Awakens was like, yes, awesome. Like right back, here we are, Star Wars. Dune 2 got me. Absolutely got me. You know what? The first Avatar in IMAX 3D, that got me. But I think of all of them, Fury Road, I will tell you right now, Fury Road is now one of my comfort movies. It is one of my comfort movies. It is one of my go-tos. If I'm just in a grumpy mood and it's raining outside, maybe I got some laundry to do or just some shit to do around the house, that's one of my go-tos. It's like John Wick, Fury Road. Like, those are some of my go-tos. And it's amazing to think that they're movies that have been made in the last 20 years, last 10 years, really. And they're just great. But Fury Road starts out with, once again, what's the timeline? Because in Thunderdome, you had Max with long hair. He'd been out in the wasteland. You also start out Max with long hair, and he's got his vehicle, and he eats this lizard because he's just trying to survive. And he is plagued by visions of those he couldn't save, right? These flashes that are kind of throwbacks. So this one, I'm not going to read anything. I'm doing this sucker by memory, okay? And all of a sudden, he hears a pursuit, and the ground is rumbling, and these vehicles pop onto the screen. Max jumps into his vehicle, and here we go. We're right into the action. And what happens? They catch him. They get to him. And they bring them back to their fortress. And these creatures, are they creatures? These white, like pale humans with this dark eye makeup. And they've captured him. And there's like this weird doctor, and they're giving him tattoos, and they're cutting his hair and his beard. And they're basically prepping him because he has, what is it, type O blood, which is what, the universal one, whatever it is. And boom, he wants to escape. This is all happening right from the time that they grab him out of his vehicle to bring him back to their fortress, the Citadel, and him trying to escape. You're right in. So now your only real breath is that now you switch to your other protagonist. And in this case, it is the Imperator Furiosa, who is making a routine run between the different cities in the wasteland. So you have the Citadel, you have Bullet Town, and you have, of course, I'm going to forget. Bullet Town. No, Gas Town and Bullet Farm. Sorry, I got that backwards. Gas Town and Bullet Farm. And she's just making a supply run. So basically, what are you going to get at Bullet Town? Bullet Farm. You're going to get bullets. You're going to get ammo. You're going to get all that stuff. What are you going to get from Gastown? You're going to get gasoline. And this is supposed to be standard. Little do we know that Furiosa actually has some other cargo. So she begins to go off the path. And she's making it seem as though she's doing this in a completely benign way, that she's really just being strategic. And this works for a while. Until it's discovered that she's really going somewhere else completely, because she has in her vehicle the wives of the leader of the Citadel, one Immortan Joe, which, by the way, is played by Hugh Byrne, who played Toecutter in the original Mad Max. And he is a warlord, and he has this shocking white hair, and his skin is also white, and he is not well. His body is covered in boils and sores, and he wears this like clear armor with his medals from when he was in the military. And he is trying to reproduce an heir, because he has one son, Rictus Erectus, who is big, strong, and powerful, dumb as a box of rocks. And then he has another son who's super duper smart. It just so happens he is severely physically disabled. That is Corpus Colossus. Anyway, he has these wives that he has in order to reproduce. And he's trying to have a healthy heir. No physical or mental incapacities, right? All of them are with Furiosa, who has taken them away because she realizes that Joe is basically enslaving these women, and she simply can't allow it. She can't allow people to own other people, particularly as concubines, just for the sole purpose of reproduction. Now, he says they're his wives, but they have names like the Splendid Engahard. You have Toast the Knowing, Capable the Dag, Cheeto the Fragile. These names, those are his wives. Splendid is, of course, his most treasured breeder. Think about that, right? So when Joe realizes that his wives are with Furiosa, he launches his war boys. Now, war boys are probably all orphans, and they get brought in, and they get a place they get housing and shelter and food. They get whatever treatment can be given, because they're all basically cancer-stricken from the elements, whether it's radioactivity or whatever it is in this wasteland. They're not healthy, and they all consider to have half-lives. They are going to perish young. And therefore, it makes them these expendable warriors who all want to be seen by Immortan Joe, right? They want to be seen. And what's so interesting is that's what I took a note for. All the way back in Mad Max, the original, Knight Rider says, "Do you see me, Toecutter?" I never noticed that before. I never noticed. Witness me is just like, see me, Toecutter, witness me. That's their whole thing. And they know that they want to be witnessed in death, because then they will be joining the afterlife in Valhalla, similar to the Norse gods. If you die a warrior, you join Immortan Joe, who's mortal, right? He's a deity. He's God on earth. And here we are. And I could go through every piece of this, but basically it's just chasing through the desert, through the wasteland, with various different combatants, by the way. There's this whole other, like, gang of, I don't want to call them nomads, but they seem relatively nomadic. And the whole point is Furiosa wants to return to the place of her birth, the Green Place of the Many Mothers. It's basically a women's colony. And she was taken there when she was a child, and this is where she's looking to go. So as they're trying to escape from Immortan Joe and his warriors, they go through this huge sandstorm, which ultimately they do end up winning that part. But they are, of course, being chased by the People Eater. Yes, right. The People Eater, who is the leader of, is he Bullet Farm or Gastown? So the People Eater, rules Gastown, and the Bullet Farmer rules Bullet Farm. The Bullet Farmer is in pursuit of them. And Max has to go ahead and take care of business. One of the War Boys, Nux, has now joined in with Furiosa and the wives and Max, and they get away. And they drive and they drive and they drive. And there's a really cool scene where they're out in this crazy like swamp, and there's these creatures that they call crows. It's basically men on stilts. It's a beautiful shot. It's done at night. It's gorgeous to look at. And they find this barren place, and there's this great scene where there's a woman in a cage, and she's like, help me, help me. Well, she's up on, I guess, like a scaffold or whatever, and it's become a meme now, but Max goes, nah, that's bait. It's so good. And it turns out it was bait, but these were the many mothers. And unfortunately, the soil has been destroyed and there's no longer a green place. So Max comes up with this plan, and he says, well, you need water. And he's like, why don't you go back? Like, you want us to go back? Yeah. And they're like, that's insane. But everything that they could possibly want, particularly for people who have a green thumb, who are adept at farming, who have all of these seeds that they've kept alive, that they've kept fresh, could be planted there. Recreate the green place. So that's what they do. After they've done this whole escape, they're going right back in to the belly of the beast. And during the battle that ensues, Splendid is not killed instantly, but she's on her deathbed, and Splendid is the one that is pregnant with Joe's child. And it turns out they get the baby out right before she dies. The baby is completely healthy and would have been the heir that Joe was looking for. So now he's lost his favorite wife. He has lost his healthy heir. Now he's just enraged. And this sequence of violent encounters, and they really mess up Furiosa badly. And Nux, in a show of sacrifice, a selfless sacrifice, basically sacrifices himself to close this gap that the vehicles were going to go through, effectively stopping all of that, but not before Furiosa, or one of the wives, I forget, straps this hook onto Immortan Joe's face, ripping off his face and his mask. Brutal, completely gnarly. And basically the battle itself is over, and Furiosa is bleeding out. And she has blood in her lungs, to which Max relieves that pressure and then hooks himself up, because he was a blood bag, right? Because of his blood type. So he was already tapped, and he basically gives her a blood transfusion right there. And they hadn't exchanged names because he's an asshole. And she'd been asking the whole time, what's your name? And he's like, doesn't matter. And finally he's like, leans in. He's like, it's Max. It's Max. Very cool, real resolution. Many people died, and they go back to the Citadel. And they take the body of Immortan Joe, and they throw it down. And now they get to rise up and take leadership of the Citadel and all of these resources. And the people are ecstatic. And the War Boys are ecstatic. Like, everyone is like, ding dong, the witch is dead. Immortan Joe is gone. And they rejoice. So they're all going up this huge elevator, if you will, cargo elevator that brings the vehicles up. And they're all together. And then Furiosa notices that Max isn't on the elevator. He isn't going up with them. and she looks down in the crowd, and there he is, mixing amongst people, kind of three-quarter turning away, heading off through the crowd, and then he just disappears. And Max is once again helped save the day, and then just disappears back into the wasteland. Oh my gosh, I love that movie. I want to go watch all of them right now. I want to go watch them all right now. So, where does that leave us? Mad Max. Well, it's the Mad Max saga. So Furiosa has no Max. And I'm okay with it because the character was badass. Charlize Theron was badass. And now Anya Taylor-Joy is playing the young Furiosa. I'm so curious to see how this plays out. You have a young Immortan Joe, and you have Chris Hemsworth. I think his character is named like Dementis or something. Chris Hemsworth as Warlord Dementis. Tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Here are some of the names, though. So you have Furiosa again, Warlord Dementis, Praetorian Jack, Immortan Joe, the Octoboss, once again, Rictus Erectus, who is the oldest son of Immortan Joe, Scrotus, the People Eater, the Organic Mechanic, once again, Angus Sampson, excellent actor, by the way. He also was in a number of The Conjurings. Mary Jo Bassa, that's right, Furiosa's mother. She's like Clan Swaddle Dog. And then you have War Boys. And it says that Max Rockatansky will make a cameo appearance in the film. So a cameo, yes, but I'm still all in. So what do you think? How do you feel about Mad Max? And how do you feel about Tom Hardy being Mad Max? So one of the things that I was talking about with these, the flow of character and where it is the timeline. Of course, you have the Pursuit special, but there's also the costuming. And you clearly see that it's like the jacket, right? The leathers that he wore all the way back in Mad Max, except continuously it's like still modified. It's, losing an arm, but he's still got the armor. Nux has it for a very short period of time. But he also has the knee brace because of course he's still going to need that to function in this environment because all the way back in the first one, he got shot in the leg. All these little continuity threads. I don't know. It just seemed like it was flawless and that it allowed Tom Hardy to jump right into the character. And when you have a character who is not known for being particularly verbose by design, by the way, once again, it's all about the action for George Miller, keeping your narrative moving by just kinetic energy. And don't even get me started on the crazy doof warrior who's playing heavy metal. Like, it's just an amazing spectacle. So I'm really curious to see how Furiosa stacks up. And this time, I got to go see it in IMAX because I did not see Fury Road in IMAX. And by the way, I also loved the black and white cut because I think that works as well. And it's just so beautiful. So George Miller has this amazing knack for incredible action sequences, done with practical effects and stunt coordinating effects. Look at some of the behind the scenes stuff. But also just beautiful cinematography and these juxtapositions between night and day and different locales as they're going along. Color really setting the mood, and all the best filmmakers do that. But George Miller, I think, is in rarefied territory about what he can put onto screen. And I think he gets a little bit underrated versus, I think, many of the other directors. Like, yeah, it's just so good. Anyway, what do you think? How do you feel about Mad Max? Is it one of your favorite franchises? Love it? Hate it? Did you not particularly care for the newer ones? You're like, oh, well, it's not Mel Gibson. Tell me what you think. I'd love to know. And how do you do that? You can email me at stuckinthe.middlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.